Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Voting no, Republican Senator Rand Paul stood firm on his no on the giant spending bill.
It adds about $270 billion to the debt. In addition, they raised the debt ceiling $5 trillion.
He was ready to compromise as long as Congress would revisit the debt ceiling every 3 months.
You need a shorter leash because you haven't shown that you're responsible with money.
And Rockefeller Capital Management CEO Greg Fleming on the surprising market performance in 2025.
In the last 3 or 4 months, the word I'm using is resilience.
Plus, the Trump tariffs hitting Brazil, a change at the top of X, Nvidia's massive market cap.
Just in the past year, they added an entire Berkshire Hathaway.
And the sweet smell of a candy cereal marriage.
What happens to Lucky Charms?
You're not lucky anymore if you don't have the green shamrocks.
It's Thursday, July 10th, 2025. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand by, Joe. In 3, 2, 1. His mic. Cue.
Good morning and welcome back from yesterday to Squawk Box.
They always come back.
Must see, live from the NASDAQ market site. Whose voice was that, you ask? It was Robert Frank. I'm Joe Kernen, along with Contessa Brewer and Superman, Clark Kent. Becky and Andrew are off today. I asked you, would you take the jacket off? But apparently there is a cape in the back, and everyone...
It's all sewn together. You can't take it apart.
Everyone would know. Everyone, and you don't know anything about the new Superman. The new. I'm reading a lot of reviews. Contessa?
I will watch it, though.
I just think if you're going to play Superman, you better show up with your cape.
You better. And you cover a lot of different beats.
I do.
Obviously here, and you're great at whatever you do. You'd be great anchoring, but we don't have to cover any vice. Do we? Any gambling or prostitution?
I don't know what Squawk Box would be if I'm on it and we don't talk about some sin.
Can you figure out a way to get into it, whether it's alcohol or...
I keep trying to
these
steal
new sex
coverage.
cruises. These new sex cruises.
Perfect.
Already. It's 6:01 and we're already at sex cruises.
In case you want to
Have you heard of this? No one could get off that boat. So if you like are on the wrong one and you look around, anyway, I didn't say they can't get off on that. I said they can't. Okay.
Nvidia's market cap briefly touched the $4 trillion mark in yesterday's session. Now that comes about 2 years and 2 months after the company first crossed the $1 trillion mark. Did you know that just in the past year they added an entire Berkshire Hathaway just in 12 months? It's amazing. Nvidia closed below the milestone yesterday, so it didn't quite get there.
Pre-market
reached it, and then the pre-market right now we're looking at 3.998. So come on, guys, we can get there again.
Yeah, it's there.
Most valuable company on the planet.
It came out of nowhere, not out of nowhere, but you would have thought Microsoft or
well, and then it's had some scares
Apple.
Along the way. We had the DeepSeek scare. Everyone thought, okay,
briefly.
Well, that's it for Nvidia, and that passed. And then we had the China scare. Well, the restrictions on selling those chips to China, that's going to kill it because 16% of the revenue or something like that. They blasted through that, so it keeps proving the doubters wrong.
You have to wonder, though, how much of this is just about rampant investor enthusiasm. How much, Nvidia has been the stock to talk about for several years now. Mm-hmm. It is the momentum mover. And so how much of this has to do with the psychology of wanting it to win?
And the Mag 7. But I don't want to look askance at how we lead technology in the world right now. We're the envy. Trump keeps saying how hot we are as a country, President. In terms of, can you go anywhere else in the universe and find a place like Silicon Valley? You can't.
TSMC, which is sort of truly multinational, they just reported earnings a couple hours ago. The revenue is up 39%.
Selling to our great tech companies.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Not selling to the French's. No. Great, what do they have? SAP or something? Is that still around?
Well, and there you're seeing the stock up more than 1% in the pre-trade. And I think what's interesting about the exceptionalism of corporate America is how it's surviving in face of the political turmoil and what policy questions.
Surviving?
What?
How did it survive the last 4 years?
And
it's gonna thrive now.
Well, it did thrive. What we saw was a market that was on the upswing.
Right. But they got expensing, the tax cuts are permanent on corporations. You might have a couple of tariffs, but deregulation, mergers and acquisitions, antitrust.
A couple of tariffs.
They're not in yet?
No, they're not.
You haven't seen it in inflation or in the labor market?
No, we haven't.
However, Swiss Re was out with a big report yesterday that said that global growth is going to slow to 2.3%, specifically and directly because of the trade war and the tariffs that have been involved, and says long term, the brand damage that is caused by all of the uncertainty means that overseas investors are not going to see the U.S. as a safe haven.
I heard that 3 months ago. That's crap.
No.
I don't
I
buy
just
that.
heard it yesterday.
The new word,
we've been saying that all along. The dollar.
The word that every strategist is now using to replace uncertainty is complacency. They're saying, well, the market doesn't get it. Well, maybe the market is smart. Maybe the market sees through these tariffs and says, either they're not going to be a big deal, they're not going to be as big as they've announced, or this is a market that's so dependent on large cap tech companies that are the least affected by tariffs. So it doesn't matter for the index.
Pick your poison. What are you worried about with the tariffs? Inflation or growth slowdown? Or, the naysayers are pearl clutching about both. And that's possible, stagflation. Or it could be neither, which is what we've seen up to this point. Now, we're waiting for Godot, every CPI number, every Friday, first Friday of the month, we're waiting for labor weakness. Nothing.
Is it possible that this is just not showing up yet in the data? It's not immediately apparent.
It's possible it never shows up.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
But he's delayed most of the tariffs have gotten respites, right? We're not at maximum threat level DEFCON 5 tariffs.
Well, speaking of tariffs, President Trump is now threatening 50% tariffs on Brazil, right?
Wow, Brazil.
Citing the ongoing prosecution of the country's former president, Jair Bolsonaro. Megan Cassella joins us now from Washington. Megan, what are you learning about the threat and about what's behind it?
Hey guys, good morning. So a lot to unpack here. This tariff letter to Brazil was the 22nd letter the president sent to a trading partner this week. But this one was strikingly different from the others. The 50% tariff, for one, is the steepest that we've seen threatened so far against any trading partner. The president says he's also directing his U.S. trade representative to open a Section 301 investigation into unfair trade practices, specifically around digital trade. That could lead to additional tariffs down the road. But most notably, Brazil was not until now facing a reciprocal tariff from this White House. The U.S. runs a rare trade surplus with Brazil, so there is no deficit to fix here. Instead, the president said in the letter that these tariffs are explicitly for political reasons, due in part, as you mentioned, to Brazil's treatment of Bolsonaro, which Trump called a witch hunt. But he also blamed what he called insidious attacks on free elections and the free speech rights of Americans. And the other thing to keep in mind with this one, guys, is just how close Brazil has been getting with China. Beijing has been investing heavily in Brazil as it looked to de-risk away from the U.S. It's now Brazil's largest trading partner. You can see here about 28% of Brazil's exports go to China, some $94 billion every year, versus just about 12% of exports going to the U.S. So that relationship not explicitly referenced in the letter, but we do know it's something the Trump administration has taken issue with.
Well, then you have to question how this improves the relationship. And in fact, President Da Silva, I know, is threatening reciprocal tariffs. Does that matter? And which industries does that hit, Megan?
He's holding firm. He promised to put the same level of tariffs in place that the U.S. does put in place. So if the U.S. goes with 50%, he's saying Brazil would go with 50% as well. It's not a huge amount of trade for the U.S. About 1.3% of all U.S. imports come from Brazil. But there are specific industries. Think about coffee. Think about some produce. Think about some oil, gas, 1%. Metals as well that could be impacted there. But you're right to ask the question of, does this ultimately, or could it ultimately, drive Brazil even closer to China? And it could, because Brazil has to have somebody buy their level of goods. We're still buying 12% of them. So if the U.S. stops buying it, China has the space there to just pick up the slack and buy even more.
They have no leverage. 1% is not going to scare anyone at this point. I thought it was interesting. How many reasons do we have for tariffs at this point? Have you calculated all of them yet, Megan? This is a new one, and I'm not saying I disagree with it, because, But
as a motivation for a tariff?
I'm not saying. I think that you can use whatever means necessary if we've got, bad actors around the globe. If it's fentanyl, that's one thing. If it's bringing back, manufacturing, that's another thing. If it's global,
whose definition of a bad actor? For instance, if China said we're going to withhold magnets because we don't like the way you're treating James Comey, would that be justified?
That's fine. They can do whatever they want. The countries can do it. You have a doubt who's wearing a white hat around the planet? I don't.
I mean, it's every country.
Well, they would argue they are, but I don't. America first. I don't have any problem thinking that we're trying to do the right thing. That's maybe that's jingoistic or whatever, but I'm not going to worry about whether China's going to not like what we ask. Maybe the Uyghurs are worried about James Comey. What, Megan?
What I was going to say, what's so interesting about this one, I haven't counted all of the reasons, the different reasons for tariffs, but this is explicitly using them for political goals rather than economic ones. It's not the very first time. I'll flag that. Remember in versus Colombia back in February, he wanted Colombia to accept more U.S. deportees and threatened tariffs there. They never went into place. This is the most similar to that because it is explicitly political. You could add fentanyl in there too, although at least that one's about the movement of goods, but that's key because it really gets to the legal justification here. Remember, these tariffs are supposed to be in place because the president says trade deficits pose a national emergency. If we're getting away from trade deficits, we're getting away from that legal justification, and these are much more likely to be challenged in court. That's if they do take effect. Maybe this is more about negotiations. We'll have to see.
The executive, in the past, there's a wide latitude for what the president himself or herself can do with tariffs.
That's right.
Now, I know that the argument was made that, wait a second, fentanyl's an emergency, so you're doing all these different, and even whether the trade deficit suddenly has become an emergency, but they still get wide latitude probably in the courts, don't you think?
They do. Yeah, and but we'll see though if what's going on in Brazil and domestic politics there. If courts agree that that's a national emergency for the U.S., that might be the argument that they make. Or maybe in this Section 301 they find other unfair trade practices that are then more legally durable.
The other thing is
other than a national emergency, there's a lot of other.
We have a trade surplus with Brazil.
Right.
Last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not taking advantage of that. That's not the reason
that they're saying it.
Right.
Megan, thank you very much for weighing in this morning. Appreciate that.
We have a trade surplus with the UK too, or something. I mean, we did a deal with the UK. That's not the reason.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
That's the point.
That's
There's a lot of reasons.
A lot of reasons.
Tariffs that we're told.
Linda Yaccarino is stepping down as CEO of Elon Musk's X, formerly known as Twitter. She didn't say why she's leaving, but a source told NBC News her exit had been in the works for more than a week. A week is pretty short.
It's a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was expected. It's been.
Yaccarino previously headed the global advertising business at our parent company, NBC Universal, before Musk hired her away in May of 2023. Musk posted in response to her departure, "Thank you for your contributions."
Jeez.
Short, sweet, succinct, as a post on X is supposed to be.
She said something about a lot of the advertisers have come back and I've accomplished a lot of what I wanted to do. But then they immediately, I think I saw it somewhere, maybe it was Drudge. I don't know why I still look at Drudge, but I do just to see, because there's sometimes, but they're just, but someone did say that she's had some reputational damage. They said that she was a very well thought of media advertising executive at NBC. Took a shot at this, only 2 years, and I'm sure but you know what, knowing her, she's so talented, she'll land on her feet, and I would not, they like to look at the half-empty.
I think this is good for her reputation. I think this had to do more with the merger with XAI.
Exactly.
So once you're subsumed into a much larger, fast-growing, everyone loves X and AI right now in terms of where they're going to put capital. Basically X became, or what was Twitter, became a lot less important. So I think the merger had a lot to do with it, coupled with the fact that she was 2 years banging her head against the wall. And she did successfully bring advertisers back. I don't think they're quite where they were before the acquisition by Musk, but they made a lot of headway, especially given that he would say something or do something that she would then have to clean up.
Exactly, from the very beginning.
Completely at odds with what she was trying to accomplish. So if you're trying to woo them back and then he's like, nobody
Right.
cares.
Yeah.
Go get lost.
Yeah, which is
it's
a nice
hard,
way of saying what he actually said.
That was before
I just don't want to be
actually.
canceled. So, that's why. But I think what's interesting is if you are able to deal with that kind of a founder in that kind of a situation, I mean, not that he founded X, but, that sort of, it's his baby.
Yeah.
He owns it. It's his. If you're able to navigate Elon Musk in that environment, who doesn't want you to come in and clean and tackle a big challenge?
Yeah.
Any company that's in a big challenge would be lucky to have her.
She got overruled with this new person as well, the new finance chief.
That Musk brought in.
That brought in and was hired, it was supported by Musk and replaced Yakarino's person, previous head of that.
It's all about AI
CFO.
now. It's all about AI.
Right.
It's gone way beyond advertising.
But it looks like the writing might have been on the wall longer than a week.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Shares of WK Kellogg are soaring following a Wall Street Journal report that says the chocolate maker Ferrero is close to a roughly $3 billion deal to buy the cereal company. WK Kellogg makes cereals like Fruit Loops, Special K, Frosted Flakes, all the good stuff. It was spun off into a standalone company in 2023, while Kellanova kept the snack brand portfolio, including Pringles and Cheez-Its. The family-owned Ferrero Rocher is the Italian candy maker behind its namesake. It's the circular hazelnut chocolates as well as Nutella. That's one of my favorites. And candy brands that include Butterfinger, Baby Ruth. They also own Tic Tacs. The Journal says the deal could be finalized as soon as this week. The Ferrero family is really interesting. They're the richest family in Italy. Gianni Ferrero is the executive chairman and the head of the family. And they've been just buying. They're the fourth largest candy maker in the world now. And as a private family, just buying every candy brand in the world. And they started in hazelnuts after World War II, and now there's a hazelnut shortage. So they're spending a lot of money out on the West Coast in California, helping farmers to develop better ways of making more hazelnuts, so they can bring it to the.
What candy is?
Nutella.
Nutella is hazelnut.
And Ferrero Rocher, those little nut balls.
Yeah, nut balls. Jesus. I love Butterfinger and Baby Ruth. I mean, that's.
Is that your go-to? I'm a Reese's guy.
I like Reese's. Okay, I like most candy. But I was thinking about the cereal business. Everything's going to be
RFK Jr.
Everything's going to be tan.
RFK
It's like my Fruit
Jr.
Loops. It's like, which one of these do I like?
And Lucky Charms. What happens to Lucky Charms? I mean,
you're not lucky anymore if you don't have the green shamrocks. Did you see the article the other day was who's really pushing back? And I don't know how you do it without M&Ms. What would
green?
What color,
where do you get it?
What
green?
Is a natural?
Maybe they'll get
M&M?
algae. Maybe they'll use algae.
The red dye is the one that is of most and utmost concern.
Supposedly, I'm still alive.
Up next on Squawk Pod, Republican Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky voted no on President Trump's megabill. He explains why.
It's equivalent to your teenager. If your teenager runs up the credit card $2,000 and they're at their limit, do you give them a $10,000 limit, or do you say, no, you got to keep paying down your limit?
Senator Paul was willing to compromise, but he wanted a leash for spending.
Congress is worse than reckless teenagers.
We'll be right back. This is Squawk Pod.
Stand by, Joe. His mic, cue.
You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC. I'm Joe Kernen, along with Contessa Brewer and Robert Frank. Becky and Andrew are off today. We know that. We know that. Thank you. Analysts,
teachers are here.
That's why you guys and gals are here. Well, as you know, President Trump signed his big, beautiful bill into law nearly a week ago. Senator Rand Paul was one of 3 Republican senators that voted against it. Join us now is Senator Paul, and it's great to have you back on, Senator. We could talk about all these things. We'll talk about, last time we had a little back and forth about whether the president should help Israel and Iran. I want to ask you about that in a little while, but you made the point that a lot of that bill you were totally in support of in terms of extending the tax cuts, and everything else. Were you in support of the what we were just talking about, the 100% depreciation as well?
It may be one of the most important parts of the bill. I mean, you can target something you don't like or looks extravagant like a plane, but what about a bulldozer? What about a dump truck? there's a lot of capital expenditures that immediately expensing them is great for the economy. It allows people to more quickly get another dump truck or another bulldozer. So no, this is probably one of the most pro-growth, positive aspects of the tax bill. I supported it in 2017. It was going to go away. I'm glad it's remaining, and I'm glad it's permanent.
Because there's so many things you like, and I've been watching you for a long time. Everybody has been watching Senator Rand Paul for a long time. If there's something in there that you're just philosophically against, you're not going to bend. You're not going to, they can whip you all they want, and you can get calls, and you're just not going to move. What was it in this bill that was just a no-go, no matter what?
Well, they talked to me through the night, and you saw me come out of a closeted room with blood dripping out of one ear. They almost had me. But no, the biggest deal for me was that it added about $500 to $600 billion in new spending, that the projections, even the rosiest of projections, will that it be in the first 5 years, it will add about $500 billion to the debt. And really next year, the most important and the most predictable, it adds about $270 billion to the debt. In addition, they raised the debt ceiling $5 trillion. This has never been done. This is historically the largest increase in the debt ceiling. And people will argue, well, it's got to go up, it's got to go up. But when you raise it $5 trillion, you sort of set the limit so high that it goes onto the back burner. And people say, oh, well, whatever, we'll talk about it in 2 years. And I really think the opposite. But when they negotiated with me, people say, oh, he'll never bend, he'll never compromise. I told them that morning, and there was a negotiation. It was either give the senator from Alaska more carve-outs and more freebies, expensing lunches for whale captains, all the kind of stuff they stuck in the bill, or they would have had to do a shorter debt ceiling. And I told them I'd do 3 months of debt ceiling, about $500 billion, which is a big compromise from my point of view. But then they'd have to vote again. And they say, oh, we don't want to vote all the time. And I said, well, that's exactly what you need. You need a shorter leash because you haven't shown that you're responsible with money. You actually need to have a short leash where we discuss this every 3 months and the American people can say, well, how well are they doing now? Have they improved their behavior? Are they getting better with money or are they getting worse?
Senator Paul, I'm just curious, when people come out and when lawmakers come out and are pushing for more responsible approach to the people's money, to the finances of the nation, and then they turn around and they put special projects in for their districts. Is it real? Is that something that it's because it matters so much? Is it just politics? I'm always confused by how, on one hand, you can say, I want to balance the budget, I want to tackle the deficit, and then go and put in your own specialty projects for your district.
So one of the disappointing things was, special tax expensing for Alaskan whale captains, but also what was put into there was a reform on food stamps. And if you have a fraud rate greater than 6%, your state would have to pay more of your share of food stamps. And it applies to everyone now except for Alaska. The fraud rate in Alaska, 60%. But Alaska is now exempt from any kind of rules to try to reform the system to make their fraud rate less. So that's what kind of happened. And it was a negotiation back and forth between them wanting to come to what I was asking for, which wasn't anything special for one state or one person. What I was asking for is more attention to be paid to the debt and to the debt ceiling. Right. And what other people wanted were special carve-outs.
They had to get you or Murkowski. They had to get you or Murkowski.
Well, what could they have given you? What could they have given you for your state that could have coaxed you into voting for this bill?
Well, that's what I told them. I wasn't looking for welfare or carve-outs for my state or particular people. I'm concerned about the general welfare of the country. And so all I asked was that we shorten the debt ceiling to 3 months. And that would have been a big reduction. They wanted to increase it $5 trillion. I said we can increase it $500 billion. But then in September, when we discuss the next big, beautiful omnibus, that spending bill, we would also discuss whether to raise the debt ceiling. And I think it's equivalent to your teenager. If your teenager runs up the credit card $2,000 and they're at their limit, do you give them a $10,000 limit, or do you say, no, you got to keep paying down your limit and we're going to give you a certain amount of money, but we're not going to give you a $10,000 limit? Congress is worse than reckless teenagers.
Would you have sunk the bill if they didn't get Murkowski and you knew your no would have sunk the bill? Would you still you would have done it still?
My no would never have sunk the bill, and the reason it wouldn't is they were negotiating with me. If my vote were going to be the deciding vote, they would have negotiated. Okay. They were negotiating. There. Well, they were negotiating that morning. The vice president was very, very close to going with me versus the subsidies for Alaska. They eventually chose the subsidies for Alaska, which shows you something, that subsidies for Alaska and more money out there was actually easier for them than having to vote on the debt ceiling again in 3 months.
For Republicans, this was as good as it was going to get for, having the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. And we're still going to be, 17% revenue, 24% spending, and because the margins were so narrow, though. But if you want to govern, sometimes you just gotta, hold your nose or something. That's what we're seeing, isn't it?
Well, the president has great political capital and political persuasive ability. If he wanted to, he could have used that to actually have a better bill. They started out with a bill that had $500 billion in new spending. That immediately made a bill top heavy and very difficult to not add to the debt. So it's not just a reduction in taxes. For me, it's much more that they started out with a spending bill, $150 billion for the military, $150 billion for the border, $70 billion in ag subsidies, and in the end, $50 billion for hospital subsidies. And there's more scattered in there, but the overall spending is somewhere between $500 and $600 billion. That's real. The estimates on cost savings in the outlying years is an estimate and a guess. A lot of times doesn't happen. The spending will happen. And so that's why we know under the rosiest projections that the deficit will get worse over the next couple of years.
Well, maybe there'll be another reconciliation bill or so. Will that happen? Is it possible to go back and look line by line like Ron Johnson wants to do and try and,
If you have to be an incredible optimist to believe that Congress will grow a spine between last month and next month. And so I'm all for it. Look, I'm voting for the rescission package. I will work with them if they want a second reconciliation package that we can do by simple majority. But are the people who were looking for carve-outs in Alaska going to suddenly all of a sudden become fiscally conservative? Are the people who want all of the different, they were afraid to end any of the Obamacare subsidies? Look on Medicaid. One simple thing could have saved almost $1 trillion. And that's simply to say that Medicaid should go back to the traditional mix. The states pay half, the federal government pays half. Under Obamacare, the federal government just paid everything, and so everybody expanded their Medicaid population because it was free, but it's not free. This is what's driving the debt, is the federal government picks up the tab for everything. If we put the split back to half state, half federal, we'd have a much better chance.
So, Senator, we were talking about Iran and whether the president should actually enter the fray on behalf of Israel, and they did. I don't know if we know everything yet. I don't know whether it's months. I don't know whether it's years. I don't know whether it's obliterated. I don't know where some of the enriched uranium is. But at this point, would you go back and say, I was wrong, maybe it was something good, we got a ceasefire between Iran and Israel and maybe a chance for some real change in the Middle East? I mean, do you think you were too strident and isolationist about doing things this time, or you still think it was the wrong move?
Yeah. I think the only people up here who are truly isolationists are the people who don't want to trade with the rest of the world. We'll actually be facing a bill next week that Graham will put forward that will try to stop trade with most of the world if they trade with Russia. That's isolationism, and I think that's a better characterization of it. With regard to the bombing in Iran, I would say two things. One, the Constitution says that if you're going to bomb another country, the president needs to come to Congress and ask for permission. That's in the Constitution. It's explicit. All the federal papers say that.
He's got
Let me finish the
there.
answer. Let me finish the answer.
All right. Go ahead.
You ask a question. You want to do an interview, or you want to do a monologue?
This is what you said
right?
last. Okay.
Look, you want to do a monologue? Get a nighttime program. All right.
You senators are so good at this. This is Elizabeth Warren's tack too.
Well, I mean, you want to interrupt, you can't have an interview.
Okay.
All right. You want an interview? Let's be civil about this. There were two reasons. One, the Constitution, and then the second is the strategic one. And I am open-minded on that. So far, it looks like strategically Iran has not made the sprint towards the bomb. We don't know everything, but we'll know more as time goes on. If in 6 months we realize that they've made a sprint and they announce they have a nuclear weapon, it will be seen as a strategic failure. If in 6 months they're negotiating and they want to give up their nuclear program, I'm more than willing to admit that strategically the president was right. On the Constitution, though, the Constitution doesn't change unless you want to amend it to get rid of the war-making power.
Well, there's a lot of, how many times did President Obama violate the Constitution in terms of, I don't know, how many times did he use drones or bombs or whatever.
And
presidents do have a wide leeway on it.
Isn't there something your mom would tell you when you were a kid? Two wrongs don't make a right. Just because other people break the Constitution doesn't mean, oh, well, the Constitution no longer means anything. That's a problem we have. That's why tariffs now are raised by the president, not by Congress.
But you couldn't have done it in secrecy. If you told anyone in Congress that it wouldn't have worked.
Well, they announced, we announced for weeks and weeks that we were deliberating over a bunker buster. So there was no secret to this. They could have easily come to Congress, and they probably would have gotten it, actually. They could have said, we're declaring war. It may well be a limited war, but we're going to bomb preemptively, mind you. Iran hasn't attacked us. We're going to preemptively attack another country. And then when we would have had the debate, and he probably would have won permission to do it. And then he would have obeyed the Constitution. But you're right. Most presidents since World War II have not obeyed the Constitution.
You know, Senator, I appreciate you coming on. I know we'll see you again. But there are certain politicians, if I don't interrupt, it will be a one-question, 10-minute interview, literally. So I can't, we both have our jobs to do, I think. But I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, Senator.
Tease will be next.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, we dig into the markets with Rockefeller Capital Management CEO Greg Fleming.
There was going to be some adjustment here. The American market was up over 50% in the last 2 years. The last time that happened was 1998 and 1999.
Get out the history books, where we've been and where we're going.
There was going to be some adjustment. It doesn't mean that American exceptionalism is over.
We'll be right back. You're listening to Squawk Pod from CNBC. Today with Joe Kernen, Robert Frank, and Contessa Brewer. Here's Joe.
Well, let's talk about markets, all of them. Tariffs, the Fed, and much more with Greg Fleming, President and CEO of Rockefeller Capital Management. Rockefeller. There got to be a lot of money there at this point. Right, Greg?
It's also an incredible name.
No, I know. Broad shoulders, though. You got a lot of responsibility.
Yes.
Former president of Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. You were huge at Merrill and played a big role in maybe salvaging what was left of Merrill in 2008. Now it's flourishing again. So
yes.
You've had
a great deal for Bank of America. Looking back,
great deal for Bank of America. You have a storied career and probably know how to analyze this stuff as well as anyone. Are you?
Thank you.
You feeling good?
Yes, I'm feeling generally good. I think what the American economy has shown in the last 3 or 4 months, the word I'm using is resilience. There's still a tremendous amount of resilience across the economy. There has been a lot of uncertainty, and there remains some uncertainty. Some of that has settled, and markets have reacted to that. But I think the economy is still hanging in there.
There's tailwinds. There's a headwind, but if you were doing a Ben Franklin close, do you know how to do that? Pros and cons. You add them up and decide how to make a decision. Ben Franklin was pretty smart.
Very smart.
Very smart.
Many great quotations he had. Yes.
He did. So now, even with the bill that was just passed, companies know tax rates are not going up. They know they can do 100% expensing of equipment.
That's a big thing.
I can give you a lot more if you want.
Yeah.
There's deregulation. There's
AI. You and I have talked about AI. You heard about Grok last night.
Well, I don't. Grok. I can't get the real story on Grok.
The 44% on that test that they built,
right?
Which was more than they were even anticipating.
So, how the tariffs right now? August 1st, we'll see. I don't know, but do the tariff uncertainty, does that on the Ben Franklin close, does that get worth 10 other things, or why has it been so front and center?
Well, you gave a good list, Joe, of things that have been settled. So better or worse, tailwinds. The bill,
antitrust.
The budget is settled. It's behind us. There are positives and negatives in it, but it's settled and it's behind us, and there's certainty there. On the tariff side, there's certainly more certainty than there was in April. We've pulled back a whole bunch of uncertainty into the equation now. But businesses are also, I think, a little calmer about what that's going to bring. You've had several months of, tariff revenue of 25 billion, 30 billion. So you're seeing the pricing effect start to work its way through. I don't think it's really yet impacted consumer behavior in a big way, and we still have to worry about the inflationary effect.
Do we?
Well, it's and it may be that along the value chain, different entities eat different pieces, and the consumer only gets so much at the end.
Lodging collapse, all the inflation in that part of, you got energy prices. I can get under $3 on gas,
and those are all huge positives. I do think the Fed will continue
for inflation,
and I think because of that. But even with those positives, the Fed is going to wait, and I think they should, because the thing that they need to avoid most, they don't want to start to deal with an economy that's hanging in there, cutting rates, and then have inflation come later. They need to avoid that word stagflation, which you and I have to go a long way back to worry about stagflation. So for them, the most important thing is to make sure when they start to move on an economy that's got tailwinds, and you just laid out a whole bunch of them, but some weakness, when they start to move on that, they want to make sure that they're not going to 3-6 months later start to see inflation with more momentum than anybody anticipates now, even though your points are fair.
Well,
so far, the data says it's not there.
Now, the market could sell off at any time. I'm not saying that that's not possible. But at this point, both the bond market and the stock market are saying that these headwinds do not outweigh the tailwinds.
I think that's true. And I also think that those markets are looking at some of the things that are unique to this time in history. I mean, AI is going to have a major impact on every business in every industry over the next 5 or 10 years. Does it boost productivity? They've got, I think, when they look at the deficit reduction that they're anticipating moving forward, Besson said this when he came into office. A lot of it was going to be over higher growth driven by AI and the productivity that AI could bring. That might happen. We'll see. That's still in front of us, too.
And you guys specialize in the high net worth investor. And in the beginning of the year, we saw high net worth investors and family offices take money a little bit out of, or certainly not putting more money into private equity. They're moving out of sort of alternatives and into publicly traded stocks. There were certainly buyers in early April. What are you seeing right now in terms of where the wealthy are allocating?
Well, you're right, Robert. And retail did, more broadly retail, and then high net worth and family offices has stepped in along the way here in the weakness in the public markets. And that's part of what's caused the market to rally. I think that high net worth, ultra high net worth family offices, they continue to be, with us, we work on a long-term plan and they stay with it. And they've done that. And one of the things that, that I've been saying for a while, there was going to be some adjustment here. The American market was up over 50% in the last 2 years. The last time that happened was 1998 and 1999. U.S. Market capitalization was 70% of world market capitalization at the end of last year. So no matter what happened this year, tariffs, there's a new administration that comes in, there was going to be some pivot from that. There are other places in the world that investments should be made. So there was going to be some adjustment. It doesn't mean that American exceptionalism is over. It just went pretty far at 70%.
So it's not like they're bailing out of the U.S. market. They were just adding a little bit to sort of rebalance, maybe adding a little bit of Europe, maybe adding a little bit of Asia.
100%. I think that's more accurate than the notion that family offices, high net worth, or even retail investors more broadly are bailing out of the U.S. market. The evidence just isn't there.
Bond market? Wouldn't you see something there? Isn't that a good canary in the coal mine?
Has always been through your career and mine, the bond market. And I think that, look, having said that, Joe, the one thing that you and I have spent a lot of time talking about over the last couple of years here is the deficits are still too high as a percentage of GDP, particularly in an almost full employment economy. And it would have been nice to see more done on the spending side.
I know. How hard is that to do, though?
Very hard.
Look at the demagoguing of the whole Medicaid cuts. I mean, you can't. Grandma's going off the cliff again in a wheelchair.
Neither party has been able to or willing to come
But if we're at 17% revenue of GDP and we're at 25 or 24% spending,
those are the numbers, exactly.
We know what we need to do.
Well, and an interesting.
But we can't do it.
But in this whole, and Joe, in this whole budget process, there's been a lot of focus on extending the tax rates. But in reality, the issue, as you just said, is spending as a percentage of GDP. And remember, the numbers that I've used in the post-1945 world, revenues as a percentage of GDP for that entire time through now were 17%, and spending was 19%. In the last 5 years, revenues as a percentage of GDP are 17%, again, So it's not like we're not collecting the same level of taxes as a percentage of GDP. And spending has been 25, 6, 7%. So nobody's put the spending genie back in the bottle. And that is the issue with the budget.
For the Fed to be right, you just have to assume that the inflation part of the stagflation is more worrisome than the stag part, because I'd like to be out ahead of the stag part, and they're not. And I worry that they're not. If tariffs are going to cost, sorry interrupting you, but if tariffs are going to cost something, if it's uncertainty and corporations can't plan and consumers, are worried, none of those things cause inflation. All those things cause a slowdown.
Look, that's what you just laid out is a very logical argument, and this is a very tricky balancing that they're doing. If I were them, though, I would wait and make sure that you don't end up with both problems.
Right, but they've still got the Volcker, every Volcker, and they still got look how they got burned with inflation a couple of years ago.
They did. Remember, that was transitory inflation?
Now the muscle memory is inflation.
But Joe, they were way off on that. The notion of transitory inflation, remember?
Off again the same way.
They could be, and the data may come back and say that they should have been faster and more aggressive on the weakness side, because inflation doesn't materialize.
It would help our debt service too, Greg.
It would. There's no question. But we also haven't seen tariffs of this level really ever.
No, we still haven't seen them.
We haven't seen them on the pricing side. You're right. We haven't seen it yet. But because we haven't seen it, and it's a new experiment, I'd let the experiment play itself out a little bit more if I was in their shoes, which I think they're doing. And look, I've been as hard on them as you have at different points in time. The transitory inflation they totally missed, and then they were running to catch up. So here I do think waiting and making sure that you're not going to have both problems, that word stagflation, is the pragmatic course.
The one other thing, Greg, that I think it's left, there is a lot of revenue coming in from the tariffs, and people say, well, it's a tax. Okay, I admit that, it's a tax, but these are the same people that wanted to raise the corporate tax anyway.
Yeah.
So if you're getting a tax through tariffs, which some of it they're eating, some of it they're not.
Yeah, the tax is on different parties along the way, too. Maybe it could be on producers, companies, and consumers.
Right. I guess the argument is it's a regressive tax, is what the argument is. But, I mean, people want to tax corporations. They're raising hundreds of billions of dollars.
Because one can afford it and one can't. That's the argument.
But the corporations are eating most of it.
But they
don't pass along all of it because they're scared. Trump's saying do not pass it along to consumers.
But Joe, they have baked it in. I think they've got $3 trillion in tariff revenue over the next 10 years. So they're assuming it settles at about $300 billion a year.
That's not in the CBO numbers, though, because it can't be.
But I think it's in the Trump plan numbers. I think.
Oh yeah.
So $300 billion a year is where they think it's going to settle. That's how much they think they're going to take in, which suggests that the average tariff will end up, somewhere between
20,
maybe mid-teens. Yeah. If you're going to collect $300 billion, it's got to be there.
It's a great university too, Rockefeller.
It is and there have been I think 28 Nobel prizes in science and medicine.
My teacher, really was my idol all through grad school. David Baltimore, Rockefeller, and he was president of Rockefeller University, I think.
Yes, he was. Yes.
Won the Nobel Prize when he was 37.
That family has done so much.
A real Nobel Prize, not an Obama.
It's a great family, the Rockefeller family.
What they've done in the arts, in medicine, in science, in national parks, in this country and around the world. They started a hospital in Beijing over a century ago. That's still there today. That's part of Peking University today, and it's one of the finest hospitals in China today, started by the Rockefeller family.
And they handed you the reins.
Yes.
That's gratifying.
I treat that very carefully.
Greg, we've known each other a long time. Good to have you in.
Thanks so much, Joe.
And that's the pod for today. Thanks for listening. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernen, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Thanks to Robert Frank and Contessa Brewer for sitting in today. Squawk Box is on TV weekday mornings on CNBC starting at 6 Eastern. To get the smartest takes and analysis and interviews from our TV show right into your ears, follow this podcast. Hit that follow button for Squawk Pod wherever you get your podcasts. And let us know what you think. You can rate or even write a brief review on Apple Podcasts. That helps other listeners find us. That's it. We'll meet you right back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.